I never imagined that 5 words could shatter so many lives. But there, in that beautifully restored Victorian manor in the Cotswolds, adorned with white roses and baby's breath, whilst my sister Emma beamed radiant in her ivory silk gown, I knew I had no choice. The secret she'd been harboring for 18 months was about to explode like a grenade, and I would be the one pulling the pin. It all began 3 weeks before the wedding. I was in Westfield, London, searching for a gift for Emma's hen party. It was a typical November Thursday, that sort of dreary, drizzling afternoon when the gray clouds hang so low you can almost touch them. I'd just stepped out of John Lewis when I saw something that made my heart stop. There was James, my sister's fiancé, walking into Tiffany's hand in hand with a woman who definitely wasn't Emma. My first instinct was denial. Perhaps it was a colleague, a cousin from Scotland I hadn't met, a client from his law firm in Canary Wharf. But then he kissed her. Not a peck on the cheek, not a friendly greeting. It was a lingering, passionate kiss, the kind you only give someone you're utterly besotted with. My legs went weak, and I had to lean against the glass storefront to steady myself. I fumbled for my mobile to record it, but my hands were trembling so violently I couldn't manage it. When I finally steadied the phone, they'd already disappeared inside. I stood there for nearly an hour, the drizzle turning into proper rain, waiting for them to emerge. When they finally did, she was wearing a new ring, an engagement ring. James had just given an engagement ring to another woman, 3 weeks before marrying my sister. I drove home to Fulham on autopilot, the lights of London blurring through the rain on my windscreen and the tears in my eyes. How could I tell Emma? How could I destroy the dreams of my older sister, the person who'd always protected me, who'd stood up to the bullies at our comprehensive school in Reading, who'd held my hand through every heartbreak? When I arrived home, I found Mum in the kitchen making miniature Victoria sponges for the wedding. She was so happy, humming along to BBC Radio 2 whilst she piped buttercream with practiced precision. The kettle was on, as always, and the whole house smelled of baking and Earl Grey. I went straight to my room and locked the door. I needed to think. I rang my best friend Sophie, but hung up before she answered. This was something I had to sort out myself. I lay awake all night, tossing and turning, imagining every possible scenario. If I told her, I'd shatter my sister's happiness. If I didn't, she'd marry a liar. The next morning, I decided to confront James. I sent him a text asking to meet, saying it was about the wedding gift. He suggested a coffee at the Ivy in Covent Garden, near his office. When I arrived, he was already there, impeccable as always in his Savile Row suit, scrolling through his phone with a smile. Probably messages from her. I sat across from him and got straight to the point. I told him what I'd seen. His face went through every shade possible, from scarlet to white, then to a greenish hue that made me think he might be sick right there amongst the business lunchers. He denied everything at first, said I'd misunderstood, that she was a client, an old friend from Cambridge. But when I mentioned the ring, he crumbled. With tears in his eyes, James told me everything. He'd met Olivia 3 years ago, before he'd even started dating Emma. They'd had a brief affair, but she'd taken a job in Hong Kong. When she returned 18 months ago, they'd run into each other at a mutual friend's party in Shoreditch. It was as if no time had passed. They'd tried to resist, he claimed, but the attraction was too strong. I asked why he hadn't ended things with Emma. He said he'd tried several times, but couldn't bear to hurt her. He said he loved them both in different ways. Emma was stability, family, future. Olivia was passion, adventure, intensity. I wanted to throw my overpriced flat white in his face. How could someone be so selfish, so cruel? I gave him an ultimatum. Either he told Emma everything, or I would reveal it at the wedding. He literally got on his knees in the middle of the Ivy, causing quite a stir amongst the Covent Garden theatre crowd. He promised he'd end things with Olivia, never see her again, be the perfect husband to my sister. But I knew I couldn't trust him. If he could lie for 18 months, he could lie forever. I left there feeling destroyed. The walk through Covent Garden felt endless, even with the usual crowds of tourists and street performers. When I got home, Emma was there with Mum, having her final dress fitting. She looked so beautiful, so radiant, that my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Over the following days, James tried to contact me dozens of times. He sent messages, rang constantly, even showed up at my flat in Clapham. I ignored everything. Emma noticed something was wrong, kept asking if I was all right. I lied, blamed it on stress at the advertising agency, said I was having issues with my boyfriend Tom. Anything but the truth. The week of the wedding arrived far too quickly. The entire family was in chaos. Aunts we hadn't seen since the Platinum Jubilee appeared to help. Cousins came down from Edinburgh and Manchester. The house became organized bedlam. Gran, at 87, wouldn't stop talking about how her wedding to Grandad just after the war had been simple but full of true love. Every word was a dagger to my chest. The Thursday before the wedding, I couldn't bear it anymore. I needed to try one last time. I asked Emma to go for a walk, just the two of us, sister time. We went to Richmond Park, where we used to go as children to see the deer. We sat on a bench overlooking the Thames, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and orange behind the London skyline. I started carefully, asking if she was certain about the wedding, if she was truly happy. She smiled, that smile that could light up the gloomiest London day, and said she'd never been more certain of anything. She talked about their plans, the house they wanted to buy in Wimbledon, the 2 children they'd have, the honeymoon in the Maldives. I tried dropping hints, asked if she completely trusted him, if she wasn't afraid of secrets. She laughed, said everyone has silly secrets, that what mattered was their love for each other. She said James wasn't perfect, but he was perfect for her. Every word was cementing my decision. I couldn't let her live a lie. Friday, the day before the wedding, the house was absolute madness. The flowers arrived wilted. The wedding cake had the wrong filling. One of the groomsmen rang to say he had COVID. Mum was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Dad was trying to calm everyone with his typical British stoicism, offering cups of tea as if they could solve everything, and I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders. That evening, we had an intimate dinner with just close family. James was there, naturally, playing the perfect son-in-law-to-be. He helped serve, told witty anecdotes about his latest case, complimented Mum's cooking. But every time our eyes met, I saw the desperation in his. He knew time was running out. After dinner, when everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the conservatory. It was a clear night, rare for November, and I could see the stars despite the London light pollution. The garden smelled of the lavender Mum had planted years ago. James appeared, as I knew he would. He tried to convince me one last time, said he'd ended things with Olivia, showed me WhatsApp messages, screenshots of their conversation, said she'd gone back to Hong Kong for good. But then he made a fatal error. He said Emma never needed to know, that it could be our secret, that he'd make it worth my while somehow. That's when I knew with absolute certainty I was doing the right thing. A man capable of suggesting something like that didn't deserve my sister. I told him my decision was final. If he didn't confess before the vows, I would. The wedding day dawned surprisingly sunny for late November. The sky was that crisp, clear blue you only get in British winters. Emma woke early, anxious and happy. We had breakfast together, just the two of us, proper English breakfast with all the trimmings, like we used to have on special occasions when we were teenagers. She held my hand and said it was the happiest day of her life, that she couldn't wait to start this new chapter. The venue was a restored manor house in the Cotswolds, about an hour from London. All honey-colored stone and mullioned windows, decorated with white roses, eucalyptus, and fairy lights. It was exactly what Emma had always dreamed of, elegant but warm. Guests began arriving, all in their finest, fascinated by the historic building, celebrating the perfect couple's love. I felt like an imposter, smiling and greeting people whilst carrying a bomb about to detonate. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock. At 2:30, I helped Emma with final touches. She was breathtaking in her dress from a boutique in Mayfair, her grandmother's pearl necklace completing the look. Mum was crying with joy. Dad was pretending he wasn't emotional, clearing his throat repeatedly. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. The string quartet began playing Pachelbel's Canon. The bridesmaids entered first, then the groomsmen, then me as maid of honor. James stood at the altar in his morning coat, handsome as ever, but I could see the perspiration on his forehead even from a distance. Our eyes met briefly, and he shook his head almost imperceptibly, silently pleading. Then Emma entered, and the entire congregation sighed collectively. She was radiant, floating down the aisle as if her feet weren't touching the ancient flagstones. Dad handed her over to James with a firm handshake and a look that said, "Take care of her." If only he knew the irony of that moment. The vicar began the ceremony with the traditional words about love, commitment, faithfulness. Each word was torture. The moment for vows arrived. James went first, promising eternal love, loyalty, devotion. His beautiful words rang hollow to me, knowing the truth behind them. Emma responded with vows she'd written herself, talking about how he'd changed her life, how she trusted him completely. Then came the moment. The vicar asked if anyone knew of any lawful impediment to the marriage. The silence in the manor was deafening. I could hear my heart pounding like Big Ben. I raised my hand. The collective gasp was audible. Emma looked at me confused. James looked like he might faint. Mum stood from her pew. Dad grabbed her arm. I walked to the altar, each step echoing on the stone floor. I stopped in front of my sister, looked into her eyes, those green eyes just like mine, and said the 5 words that would change everything. He's been with another for 18 months. The silence that followed was different from before. It was heavy, loaded, like the air before a thunderstorm. Emma blinked several times, as if she hadn't understood. James tried to speak, but I continued. I told her about Westfield, about Olivia, about the ring. I showed the blurry photo I'd managed to take of them together. The chaos that followed was indescribable. Emma ripped off her veil and threw it on the floor. James tried to explain, begging, saying it was a lie, then a misunderstanding, then admitting everything at once. His parents tried to salvage the situation. Mum was sobbing. Dad looked ready to punch James despite being 20 years his senior. But Emma didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply removed her engagement ring, placed it in James's hand, and walked out. We all stood frozen, watching her leave, her wedding dress trailing across the medieval stones, her posture straight despite everything. I ran after her, but by the time I reached the car park, she'd already got into a taxi and left. The reception was obviously canceled. Guests departed gradually, whispering amongst themselves, some looking at me with anger, others with pity. James disappeared at some point, shepherded away by his mortified parents. Mum didn't speak to me. Dad only said I'd done what I thought was right, but his voice was heavy with sadness. We drove back to London in silence. Emma wasn't at home. She wasn't answering her mobile, wasn't responding to texts. I stayed awake all night, torturing myself, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Perhaps I should have told her privately, earlier. Perhaps I should never have told her at all. Perhaps. The next morning, Sunday, I woke to Mum shouting downstairs. I rushed down to find the whole family gathered in the sitting room. Emma was there, but she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, mid-40s, well-dressed, holding her hand, and she was smiling. Not a forced smile, but genuine, one I hadn't seen in ages. She introduced him as Marcus, said they'd been together for nearly 18 months, said she'd known about James and Olivia from the start, had hired a private investigator after finding suspicious credit card statements, said she'd been waiting for the right moment to reveal everything. The room fell silent. Mum sank into the sofa as if her legs had given way. Dad's mouth was agape. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Emma continued, said she'd met Marcus at a medical conference in Edinburgh, that they'd fallen in love gradually, that he'd been her support throughout discovering the affair. She explained she'd decided to go through with the wedding to teach James a lesson. She wanted him to suffer the public humiliation she'd suffered privately. But she hadn't counted on me discovering and revealing everything. She said she was actually relieved, because she didn't know if she'd have had the courage to go through with her plan. Mum exploded. How could she do this to the family? How could she lie to all of us? The money spent, the public humiliation, the shame before friends and relatives. Dad tried to mediate but was clearly on Mum's side. The argument escalated quickly, raised voices, accusations from all sides. Emma then dropped the final bombshell. She was pregnant, 3 months along, with Marcus's child. They were moving to Edinburgh, where he had a practice. She'd already arranged a transfer from Guy's hospital. The flat she'd shared with James in Battersea was already on the market. This was goodbye. Mum said horrible things, called Emma shameless, a liar, said she'd destroyed the family, said she didn't want to see her again, that she was dead to her, said Emma was no longer her daughter, that she didn't want to know the grandchild, that she'd made her choice. Emma cried for the first time. She begged Mum to understand, said she just wanted to be happy, that she'd suffered with James, that she deserved a second chance at love. But Mum was immovable. She ordered Emma to leave, said never to return. Dad tried to intervene, but Mum threatened to leave herself if Emma didn't go. I stood paralyzed throughout the row. I felt guilty for precipitating everything, but also betrayed that Emma hadn't confided in me. When she walked past me to leave, she stopped and whispered that she didn't blame me, that I'd done what I thought was right, but she needed time away from everything and everyone. Marcus, who'd remained silent throughout, simply held her hand and they left together. The sound of the door closing was like a gunshot in the silence that remained. Mum went upstairs in tears. Dad followed her. I was left alone in the sitting room, looking at family photos on the mantelpiece, wondering how we'd reached this point. The following days were hell. The story spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, through family WhatsApp groups, through colleagues, each version more distorted than the last. Some said I'd made it all up out of jealousy, others that Emma had planned everything from the start to keep the wedding gifts. James tried contacting me repeatedly. He sent messages saying Emma had ruined his life, that Olivia had ended things because of the scandal, that he'd lost his position at the law firm because the senior partner was Emma's godfather. I blocked him everywhere. I had no pity for him. He'd created his own destruction. 2 weeks later, I received a message from Emma. A photo of her and Marcus on Arthur's seat in Edinburgh, hands linked over her still flat stomach. She wrote only that she was happy, that she loved me, and hoped one day the family could reconcile. I showed Dad, who sighed and said, "Time heals everything." Mum saw the photo over his shoulder and left without a word. A month passed. The house was different without Emma, quieter, colder. Mum never mentioned her name, had put away all the photographs. Dad sometimes let something slip about her, but stopped mid-sentence when he saw Mum's look. I felt torn between loyalty to family and love for my sister. I learned through a mutual friend that Emma was well. She'd secured a position at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh. She and Marcus had married in a registry office with only his parents present. The pregnancy was going well. It was a girl. They were going to call her Margaret after our Gran. I told Gran Margaret, who'd taken ill after the whole scandal. She held my hand with her frail fingers and said life was too short for grudges. Said Mum had always been too proud. It had always been a problem in the family. Asked me not to give up trying to reconcile everyone. 3 months after the wedding that never was, Dad had a mild heart attack. It wasn't serious, but it frightened the entire family. In the hospital, whilst we waited for news, Mum broke down. She wept as she hadn't since the day of the scandal, said she couldn't lose Dad too, that she'd already lost a daughter. It was the first time she'd admitted the pain she was feeling. I rang Emma. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. When I told her about Dad, she said she'd catch the first train from Edinburgh. Mum said nothing when I told her, just nodded. When Emma arrived at the hospital, her bump now visible under her cashmere jumper, Mum looked at her for a long moment before opening her arms. Their embrace was long, wet with tears. Marcus stayed back, respecting the moment. Dad, when he heard Emma was there, smiled for the first time in months, said his heart was already better just seeing the family together. Typical Dad, always trying to unite everyone with humor. The reconciliation wasn't easy or immediate. There were difficult conversations, hard truths spoken, forgiveness asked and granted. Emma explained her reasons better, how much she'd suffered with the betrayal, how Marcus had been her safe harbor. Mum admitted she'd been too harsh. That pride had spoken louder than love. We discovered that James had moved to Manchester, starting over away from the scandal. Olivia, apparently, was engaged to another man in Hong Kong. It was as if that chapter had closed definitively for everyone involved. The Battersea flat was sold. Emma donated her share to Great Ormond Street Hospital. Margaret was born on a spring morning, with Emma's eyes and Marcus's smile. Mum was the first to hold her granddaughter, weeping with emotion. Dad, recovered now, joked he'd spoil the little one rotten. I, looking at my niece for the first time, thought about how life takes unexpected turns. Margaret's christening was our first family gathering after everything. Simple, intimate, just the closest family and friends at a small church in Hampstead. Nothing like the grand wedding that never happened. During the small reception at Emma's new home in Edinburgh, Mum asked to speak. She said she'd learned that family isn't about perfection, it's about forgiveness. James sent a gift for Margaret, a silver rattle from Harrods with a card apologizing for everything. Emma read the card, smiled sadly, and donated the rattle to charity. Marcus proved to be an excellent husband and father, devoted to Emma, besotted with his daughter. It was strange seeing her so happy after everything she'd been through. A year later, at Margaret's first birthday party, we were all together again. The little one was taking her first steps, giggling as Dad held her tiny hands. Mum was making Victoria sponges, the same ones she'd made for the wedding that never was. Emma was pregnant again, a boy this time. That afternoon, as we watched the Scottish Highlands from Emma's garden, she pulled me aside. She thanked me for having the courage to speak the truth, even if at the wrong moment. Said if it weren't for those 5 words, she'd have continued with the charade and never been truly happy. Embracing each other, watching our family through the French windows, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened, I realized that sometimes destruction is necessary for reconstruction. That sometimes 5 words can destroy a false world to build a real one. That sometimes true love rises from the ashes of a dishonest love. Today, 3 years after that interrupted wedding, our family is different, but united. Emma and Marcus had 2 more children after the second, a girl called Rose. They come to London once a month, and we go to Edinburgh whenever possible. Mum and Emma rebuilt their relationship, stronger and more honest than before. As for me, I learned that truth always finds a way, that keeping secrets to protect someone sometimes causes more pain than revealing them, that family is about choices, forgiveness, and unconditional love, and that 5 words can destroy a lie, but many more are needed to build a truth. James rebuilt his life in Manchester. We heard through acquaintances that he married, has a son, seems happy. Emma never speaks of him, as if that part of her life had been completely erased. Marcus legally adopted Margaret, who'll never know she once had another father. Sometimes, at family gatherings, when we're all together, laughing at something Margaret's done or watching the children play in the garden, I find myself wondering what would have happened if I hadn't spoken that day. Would Emma be married to James, living a lie? Would James still be with Olivia secretly? Would Marcus just be a passing affair? We'll never know. What I do know is that my sister looks at me sometimes, during these moments of family happiness, and whispers a silent thank you. And I know that despite all the pain, all the suffering, all the destruction those 5 words caused, they also paved the way for something much greater and truer. Life has these ironies. A destroyed wedding became the foundation for a stronger family. A revealed betrayal opened doors for true love. 5 words that could have been the end became a new beginning. And Emma, who could have hated me forever, became more than my sister. She became my best friend. Yesterday, on her wedding anniversary with Marcus, we had a family dinner. Nothing elaborate, just us, good food, and lots of love. During the toast, Emma said something that struck me. She said the best day of her life wasn't the dream wedding that didn't happen, but the day the truth came out and she could finally be free. Mum, who once couldn't even hear about that day, laughed and said, "I'd always been the bravest in the family." Dad added that courage sometimes means doing the right thing, even knowing it will hurt. Marcus thanked everyone for accepting him into the family, despite the unusual circumstances. That night, driving home, I stopped at the same Westfield where it all began. The shopping center was bustling as always, people living their lives, keeping their own secrets. I sat on the same bench where I'd steadied myself after seeing James with Olivia. So many changes in such a short time. My mobile buzzed. It was a message from Emma with a photo of all of us at dinner, smiling, united. The caption read simply, "Real family." I smiled, put my phone away, and drove home. Some stories need to be destroyed so that others, better and truer ones, can be written. And so ends the story of how I destroyed my sister's wedding with 5 words. But it's also the story of how those same words built something much greater. Because in the end, the truth, however painful, will always be better than the most beautiful of lies. And true love will always find its way, even if it must pass through destruction first.